Hello everyone, this is episode 4 in my 3D printing playlist, and I thought what I'd do for this one is break it into sort of 3 parts. So I'm going to show you a few things that I've actually now printed and painted, and while I'm doing that I will give you an update on news, basically, of things that I've been purchasing and so on. Getting quite excited about 3D printing now, and really gone mad on Kickstarters and so on. And then after that I'll talk a little bit more on sort of techie kind of topics, so anyone who hasn't got a 3D printer or isn't interested in acquiring one can sort of stop at that point. But I've sort of been making a lot of adjustments to the way I print, because I was getting a lot of failures and so on. So it will give people an idea of the sort of problems you encounter, but also if you are encountering those problems yourself, it might give you a few tips on how to put them right. So first of all then, I'll not leave this up on screen very long. It's another Draken that I've printed up for the game of Wings of Glory. This was a free STL file from Thingiverse. I've shown you one already that I painted up, but this one I painted in different kind of colours, make it look a little bit more like an Allied observation balloon. And it took me a little while because I was trying to put it onto a sort of glass rod as a flying stand, and it's very kind of heavy, especially as you have to kind of put the stand attachment sort of to the back of that basket for the observer, so it does make it very awkward and tends to sort of lean forward, and I didn't have any joy, so in the end I used one of my old Omnistand flight stands like the old one, and settled for that. Anyway, let's go on to some other things that I painted up. These are all Western buildings that I printed up in 15mm scale. They're from Nazhevitz Model Bau. I've been buying a lot of their stuff. Talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But this is from their, what do they call it? Wild West. I think they call it Wild West folder, and I didn't intend to use that folder for 28mm wargaming for Dead Man's Hand, because I've already acquired and assembled a lot of foreground buildings which I wanted to use for that game. But I am sort of slowly getting towards being able to play Peter Pig's Western rules in 15mm, and for that you need a few buildings to represent settlements and so on. Not many, not as many as this, but I thought I'd get a few printed, and some of them will be all right for 15mm ACW as well. So I showed you this one unpainted some time ago. It's the church. All these buildings come with loads of internal features. Like this one had pews, the organ, the altar, loads of stuff. But I decided in 15mm, I don't tend to kind of put bases inside buildings with 15mm, so it was all a little bit fiddly, so I just glued the roof on and didn't bother with painting the interior. But this would do for ACW as well, so it's quite a nice little building. Then there are two small houses. This comes in a variety of parts, so the walkway is separate and you have to sort of glue it on, and the stilts as well, the stilts. And they don't fit together brilliantly. You can see, how there's a bit of a kind of lift on that walkway, but to my eye that sort of works in a way. It makes it look a little bit more ramshackle. So there are two houses. Again, even small things like this, you get stoves and so on that you can put in there, and they're designed to sort of communicate with the stovepipe chimney. And then there's a general store. With Nazhevitz model bow in particular, I might as well give you some of the news now. I sort of purchased their first set of Napoleonic buildings. I noticed that it was on Kickstarter back in December, and I've never invested in any Kickstarters before, and I didn't with that one simply because I thought it would be a long wait before they actually released the files. But in fact they were on sale to the public back in January, so I made a purchase of them then. But then they almost immediately brought out a second Kickstarter with even more buildings in it. So I then thought, well, I'll invest in the Kickstarter. And most of these Kickstarters I've discovered now for 3D printing and STL files, what they do is they offer you a sort of catch-up deal. And because I was intending to acquire most of Nazhevitz Model Bow's back catalogue, as it were, it was a complete no-brainer, because if you purchase them from the website after the Kickstarters ended, they were about €65 per folder. But when you invest in the Kickstarter, so for instance, I invested €200, and for that you get the new Kickstarter, which I could be confident was going to come out very swiftly once the month of the Kickstarter had ended. But you also get 4 back Kickstarter projects. So in other words, you get 4 times €65, 240 plus 260, isn't it, euros worth of files for the price of €200 plus the new project. So absolutely, I went mad with it, really. And I've now got that second set of Napoleonic files. They're absolutely fantastic, and 4 of the previous sets. So I went for the medieval, and for the Crusades, and for World War II in Russia. And a lot of those buildings, although I haven't got any sort of World War II Russian figures, a lot of the buildings are going to be great for other periods, such as Napoleonic and the Russian Civil War. One other as well, slipped my mind for the moment. Oh yeah, some of the kind of more rustic looking, log cabins and that will be fine by fire and sword as well. So I'm going to get lots of use out of that. And the other one I got was Asian buildings. Now with that, there are lots of really lovely things like samurai houses and stuff like that. Things that you just don't normally see, on sale. And I can print those up both for my 28mm figures and for my 15mm figures. So, again, it's a no-brainer. But also, it's not just Japanese buildings. They have a lot of Chinese-style buildings, and they are going to be ideal both for my Korean War figures and for my Russo-Japanese War figures. Because a lot of the buildings in Manchuria, where a lot of the Russo-Japanese War was fought, were kind of like walled compounds. They had on the battlefields. There were these walled farms that were used as sort of strong points and so on. And I can now print some of those up. I've never been able to find those before. So I can print some of those up and use them in those games. So really excited about that. The one problem was about the time that I was getting really kind of interested in, acquiring a lot of these wonderful buildings. I began to sort of get loads of failures on my 3D printer. I must have gone through at least a litre of resin, and it was just sticking in great slabs to the film, the FEP, rather than to the print block itself, and getting really frustrated and thinking how I'm never going to be able to get these buildings printed. Just couldn't find any solution to it, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit more about in the third part of this video. This is a blacksmith's, and with this one again, this is a sort of slight fail here. You can see it doesn't join very well, but again, it doesn't worry me too much because I wanted it to look a little bit shabby. But if I hadn't glued the roof down, this is one that had masses of little interior details, such as the forge and an anvil and so on. So I printed all those off, and I was thinking I might be able to make use of them as a sort of outside forge, in a sort of army camp or something like that. And again, I'd be able to use that in the game of Western, but this one would be all right for ACW as well, in the sort of group of buildings to represent a small town or settlement. So really, really happy with all those. I was going to say something else about this whole issue of fails. I'll just turn the camera off for a second and put something else up in front of it, and can think about that while I'm doing that. Yeah, I remember now. It wasn't about fails. It was about Kickstarters. Having got that really good sort of bargain from Najewicz Modelbau, I immediately started finding other companies that did very similar sort of offers, and one in particular, which is WOW Buildings, or it's either WOW or WOW Buildings, were releasing a set of buildings for what they called the Alamo and ACW. Not so interested in the Alamo, really. I mean, maybe one day I'll do it, but it's always struck me as a battle that is sort of difficult to war game because it was so one-sided. But yeah, they're really nice buildings. But they had a load of buildings for ACW that were really unusual and unique, and so I immediately subscribed to that. But also they had a similar thing where you could gain one of their previous files from their back catalogue. So I went for a Second World War one that they did, and it's just immense, absolutely immense. loads of stuff in it that will come in useful at one point or another. It's too much to list, but things like Pegasus Bridge, Pavlov's house, I think, lots of stuff for Stalingrad anyway, the department store and so on, and lots of generic stuff which again I can use for other conflicts and other periods. There's an airport control tower in it which is sort of obviously intended as sort of Battle of Britain type building, but again, you know, that I was thinking of using that for modern African wars. The scene in the Wild Geese when they have to get to the local airport to steal a plane and get out. It looks very similar to the control building in that, so could use it for that. So yeah, really going mad on Kickstarters. There's a couple of others. I won't tell you too much about them now because I want to sort of reveal them later. But one that hasn't completed yet. It's got about another 5 days to go, which I'm really excited about. Is a whole set of files for 1/1500th scale World War One ships, which is the scale that I was beginning to kind of acquire from War Times Journal. So it will match the ships that I've got for that, only a lot more cheaply. And again, they have a similar offer where this set that I've pledged for is the ships from the Mediterranean countries, so Italy, Austria-Hungary. But their initial Kickstarter, which was about a year or two ago, was for the German and British navies. So I'm getting that kind of on the catch-up kind of offer. So really looking forward to getting those and doing some more naval wargaming when I got those printed up. Anyway, I should be saying, I should have said earlier, this is the painted up Stagecoach, which I showed you on the previous episode. Painted up quite well, I think. I've also purchased, but I haven't painted them up yet, from Freycore. They do a set of 6 15mm Stagecoach horses, which I can put in front of this and make it look as though it's, you know, make it look a bit more complete. The only problem with that is that they are galloping horses, so it's not going to look right really without some crew, at least the driver, riders and things. So I may leave them off and just, as I say, have it as a bit of scattered terrain for the game of Western. But yeah, I was quite pleased with the way this turned out. Anyway, that's probably all my news and just about everything that I've got painted and, you know, ready for play now. So what I'm going to do now is go on to sort of discussing a few more sort of the sort of technical side of things that have been happening, and anyone who's not interested in that can turn off now. Right, now these are the component parts of the Grand Redoubt at Borodino that I've finally successfully managed to print out. I have printed them up in what I think is 18mm scale, and my intention is really to use the Redoubt in my Crimean War games rather than in a Napoleonic game, because they have the look of some of the redoubts and defences outside of Sevastopol anyway, so I'm sure they'll be fine for that. But I had great difficulty. This is around the time when I was beginning to get a lot of fails, and it was getting very frustrating because I was just itching to print up some of these models from Nadjevitz Model Bow, and I was just getting fail after fail after fail. And when it started, it was I was failing to print up some of the town buildings in 28mm scale that I thought would be suitable for conflicts such as the 7 Years' War and so on. And as I say, getting really frustrated, didn't know what was going wrong. And I had to sort of start experimenting and tweaking things. Basically, the as far as I could tell, the problem was that all the prints were beginning to stick to the FEP rather than to the build plate. So it was just a matter of putting that right. And I was Googling and searching on YouTube and things for suggestions, and it is a very common failure. And there are lots of things you can find recommendations about how to put it right. But the mistake that I was still making, I think, which is advice that I would give people who are experiencing similar problem, is don't just try one tweak and then try another print to see if that will work, because the chances are it's not going to work. The reason I was doing that was that I'd had a sort of long run from the beginning of my 3D printing kind of experience right through to when this happened, of successes. So when it started to fail, I thought, well, it must be something very sort of simple. It must be one small thing that if I correct, I can get back into a successful run of prints again. In fact, that isn't the case. So what I did in the end was I adopted all these suggestions and all the tweaks and made all the changes that I could think of that might be making a difference, and then got back into a run of successful printing. And now I have the luxury of just turning down, as it were, some of those changes and doing it individually, and then when it begins to fail again, I can then tell that it was that particular factor that was making the big difference. So that is what I would, for instance, one of the most common reasons that prints begin to stick to the film rather than to the build plate is that the printer needs re-zeroing. So if you are having the problem and you kind of search for solutions, that is the first solution that will be offered to you. So you re-zero your printer, you then waste a whole load more resin trying to print something that fails again, only to confirm that it wasn't zeroing your printer that mattered. And if you carry on doing that with lots of different solutions, you're just still going to continue to get fail after fail after fail. So you're much better off having a real kind of shotgun approach to it, making all the fixes that you can, and then seeing what it was afterwards, rather than approaching it from the other direction. Which is why I've got these 6 parts out here. It's not just to show you the prints, which are rather lovely. I haven't painted it up yet, but very pleased with the quality of that, and it's going to make a very nice little tabletop model when I do finally get it printed. But I wanted to use these 6 elements as a sort of way of discussing this whole topic. So as I say, I was having problems printing 28mm buildings, and I went, I thought I'd try and do something a little less ambitious and print these sort of smaller individual items up one at a time, and I started with this, I think, nice small little piece, and it came out fine. Now, what I thought might be the reason, when that came out fine, I thought what might be the reason then is that I'd been trying to print these 28mm buildings with a light grey resin. So that is the first sort of change that I had made. I had been printing with a black resin, so I showed you this in the past, which is a part of a palisade of a fort. Had been having a nice run of success with black resin. Then I changed to light grey, and was able to print some things up in 15mm for a friend of mine, like the windmill at Ligney and so on, and some of those wagons that I showed you, that kind of thing. They were all coming out fine, but the buildings weren't. So I wondered that it could have been two things at that point. It could have been the resin. The quality of the resin wasn't very good for, not the quality of the resin, but the characteristics of the resin weren't suitable for larger buildings, larger prints. Or it could have been the actual size itself was having some kind of contributory factor to this problem, because basically you want the print to stick to the build plate, and if that isn't happening, gravity might be a factor. The weight of the object might be a factor, because the build plate is on top and the film is below, so gravity is obviously going to favour the print sticking to the film. So I thought, when I was successfully printed this one in black, and it's a smaller kind of print, and it came out okay, that maybe that was one of the two things. So I then went on to try and print this, which is slightly bigger, and it began to fail again. It began to sort of, I would have that up to about that level, stuck to the film, and then no more. So what I did at that point was, I think at that point I was trying to do it with light grey resin, and I switched to black and it didn't work. So I then thought, is it the resin? Is it the resin colour that's causing the problem? So I thought, well, I know in the past I've successfully printed that, so I had to go at printing something similar in light grey, and it came out fine, absolutely fine. So, as I say, what the mistake I was making was to basically just change one thing at a time. So change, the size of the model, just to try and print a different dimension of model, or to change the resin colour, to zero the build plate, and it was very kind of haphazard and intermittent. The next thing that I tried was, thinking it was the weight, was to hollow out some of these models so that the interior parts were hollow, meaning it was less weighty. And I think that was the point at which I got this to successfully print. So I went on to try and print this, and I think it failed again. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think it failed again. So I then decided that I really should try and do something about punching holes, such as you can see here, into the model, so that some of the resin that's trapped inside will drain out as it's printing, causing there to be less weight. And it was a few weeks ago now, and I can't remember the exact sequence, but I think I got this one to print successfully. Thought, aha, that's the way to go. So went on to try and print this which is exactly the same size and dimensions. It's just a sort of mirror image of that last piece. Got some holes printed, punched in various places for the resin to pour out, and began to get a lot of fails with that. So I was back to the drawing board again, because I was beginning to exhaust all the things that I could think of. In terms of punching, by the way, I ought to say at this point is that you really can't punch a hole into a part of the model that is going to be on the exterior when you finish. So you have to put them into all these faces that are going to glue together and be hidden, either on the base and so on. And they tend to be the parts of the model that are attached to the build plate. So, for instance, that is the surface that was attached to the build plate. So, in a way, there's not really any point in putting a drainage hole there, because it's going to be firmly attached to the build plate if it works, and none of the resin is going to pour out until after you have printed the model, which is partly what contributes to the mess, because you get uncured liquid resin pouring out of the model. Anyway, that's by the by. So it was at this stage that I then began to despair, and I just tried to trawl the internet for solutions and put them all at one stage into my printing process and see if they worked, and they did. So I then had success in printing these three pieces. So I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that I did that might come in handy for you. Now, the first thing was to make the film less adhesive by smearing it with a thin coating of something like WD-40. You don't need to use a lot, but just sort of use a bit of a kitchen towel and smear a kind of, I think I use about 9 drops of WD-40 that I drop onto the film, and then wipe it off, making sure that I've covered the entire surface of the film with WD-40. I think that is a very good tip, but as I say, I don't know whether that was the one that actually tilted it, because I've done a lot of other things as well. Coming back to this business of the resin, I did sort of begin to look at all the various sort of parameters that you can change in the slicing software, and they are things like the thickness of the slice, the number of sort of base slices that you print, which are the ones that are attached, that should in theory be attached to the build plate. So you have a number of base slices which you give a longer exposure time to, so that they cure more kind of completely and are then hopefully attached to the build plate. Another thing on that subject is that you do want to be kind of printing a model where the surface area of the initial attachment to the build plate is greater than the subsequent surface areas that might attach to the film, in which case there is more kind of traction on the build plate size. So that is something you can think about in terms of realigning the model in the slicing software, so that a larger surface area is attached to the build plate. But then you might have to start thinking about sports. I don't know. That's sort of irrelevant anyway. But apart from the number of base layers, there are also things like the lift speed at which the build plate rises up and lifts away from the film, and on top of that, the distance which it moves, and that I discovered was very important. One of the interesting things I discovered looking into all this is that those parameters, there's a whole host of them: slice thickness, exposure times, lift speed, lift distance. They all vary depending on where you look. So, for instance, your 3D printer will almost always come with some proprietary slicing software. So I've got an Anycubic Photon Mono X, and that comes with its own slicing software that you can use. Some people choose to use other types of slicing software, and that's fine. But the advantage of using the proprietary one is that your model of printer will already have some sort of factory settings as it were, in the slicing software. So you've just got to select your own printer from the drop-down menu, and then then you're ready to go. The disadvantage of doing that, however, I've found, is that the parameters that are given to you in that sort of in those factory settings are all designed to bring out the qualities of the printer. So in particular, the speed at which the print can be produced. So they tend to be very kind of they make the thickness as thick as possible, because the thicker the slices, the quicker you're going to get the print done. That's not necessarily going to give you a very good print, but it is going to reduce the printing time. And as well as that, everything else that is defined in terms of milliseconds is the slower, the smaller they can make that, the faster the scan will be. So the exposure times, the number of base slices, if they can reduce that, they have a longer exposure time. So if they can reduce that, it's going to make the print quicker. The lift speed is going to be as fast as they can get it, because the faster you can lift the build plate off the film and bring it back down again, the quicker the print is going to be. The lift distance, the shorter that can possibly be, the less time it takes to reach that point and return. So you see what I mean? It's all those parameters are really what the person who produced them is aiming to do is to make the spec of the printer appear as fast as possible, and you really want to kind of adjust that and take your time, especially with a printer like the Anycubic Photon Mono X, because it is a particularly fast printer anyway. So you have room, you have a luxury of being able to, sort of play with that and spread the scanning time out again, stretch it out again, in order to have more chance of success with your print. So if you go to the recommendations that the STL file designer gives you, they will be completely different. So Nazhevitz Model Bau do that. They recommend various settings, and the prime example of that is that they recommend that you print the models at much thinner slices. So whereas the slicing software was suggesting that I use 0.05 millimeters, Nazhevitz Model Bau say use 0.02. Now if you do that, you're going to more than double the time it takes for you to print the model. So, but you are going to get a much more detailed, higher resolution print, and the exposure time is going to be more likely to cure the slice, because it's basically a thinner slice, so there is less volume of resin that needs to be cured with each slice in order for it to harden more. And again, that takes you back to the opacity of the resin. So a sort of lighter coloured resin such as this is going to be less opaque, and therefore the ultraviolet light is more likely to reach the extremity away from the film, the point of the slice away from the film, more kind of efficiently. So a darker resin is going to require longer exposure times than a lighter resin. And that takes me on to, if you actually then look on the resin manufacturers' websites, they give different factors again to the recommendations of the file designer, because their priority is to give you the best factors to cure that specific resin. So all these things, do matter, and they were all contributing to this. I was changing the resin, I was changing the slice thicknesses, all this kind of thing, and I was I couldn't work out why it was failing. So you're better off tweaking everything up and then going down slightly, with each, when you make a change such as the resin color. But in terms of the larger printers and the lift distance, this is a tip that I'm pretty sure was absolutely critical, that I got from another YouTube channel, was that if you consider that you've got a very large resin vat, now the film at the bottom of that vat needs to have a certain amount of flex in it. When the build plate leaves the film, it sort of lifts up from the film. You don't want the entire slice to lift off in parallel to the film. You want there to be a sort of peeling action, and then it will come away more readily. So you do need to have a certain amount of flex in the film. However, when you have a larger printer, and this is what this guy advised, is that the flexibility in the center of the film is obviously going to be greater if you have a larger surface of film area. And that's because there is more kind of leverage, as it were, there. So whereas the factory settings might come with a suggested distance of, say, 5 millimeters, definitely for a larger printer, you want to increase that to at least 10 millimeters. Now that is immediately going to slow down your printing speed, but it does give the film the opportunity to detach from the print, and therefore from the build plate, and click back onto the LEDs. 5 millimeters with a big printer is often not enough for the film to have had the opportunity for the tension to kind of pull on it and for it to peel off. And I think, I'm pretty sure that it was that, with the administering of some WD-40, that really swung the balance. And as I say, I don't think I've had many fails at all since I've adopted all those sort of tactics, and I'm back into the fun of printing now and getting really excited. Currently printing off some absolutely fantastic things that I don't intend to show you until I've actually got them painted up, but they are pretty mind-blowing. So anyway, that's the end of my that's the end of this episode and my waffling. Sorry it was all a little bit rambling and so on, but just wanted to give you an update on where I am, show you some of the things I painted, and talk a little bit about the tips that I'm beginning to learn and how my kind of experience is growing. But 3D printing is definitely not just the sort of push a button and go kind of hobby. You definitely have to kind of learn from your mistakes and learn from other people's experience and develop your own techniques and so on. And it's proving to be a really interesting kind of hobby and a really interesting supplement to my wargaming hobby as well. Right, okay, as I say, thanks very much for watching. See you on the next episode. Bye for now.